In this video, we're going to look at data types. In the previous video, we were able to look at statements. We saw that a program is made up of a lot of statements put together to form the program or the code. We saw some other fundamentals as well. In JavaScript, we saw data types, variables, functions, comments, and operators. So in the coming videos, we are going to be looking at this concept. So data types, we have two categories of data types. Data type is simply a way data is represented or a type of data in JavaScript. So if you are writing code in JavaScript, and not just in JavaScript, all programming languages have data types. So if you're writing code, you are definitely going to be dealing with data. There are points where you have to collect data from the user. There are points where you have to send data to be displayed to the user and all of that. So we deal with a lot of data, and it's important to have this data grouped into different types that can be recognized by the system. The advantages of, or one of the advantages of having data in data types is you can perform some specific operations on some data types. So if you have like numbers, there are some operations you can perform on numbers. There are some operations you can perform on numbers that you can't perform on strings, right? So we have different types of data. We have numbers. So we have two categories. First of all, we have the primitive data types and we have the structural data types. So this is the two categories of data types we have in JavaScript. We have the primitive data types and we have the structural data types. So for primitive data types, we have six data types under the primitive data types categories, and we have two under structural data types categories. So for primitive data types, we have numbers, we have string, we have boolean, we have undefined, we have null, we have symbol. And for structural data type, we have arrays, we have objects, right? So these are the two categories. So we're going to be looking at what each of these mean, especially for the primitive data types. So for structural data types, the arrays and objects, we'll be looking at that in the coming videos, because we have a lot to cover on arrays and object, so we are going to be treating that in a separate video. So in this video, we are going to focus on this primitive data type. We need to know what a number is, what a string is, what a boolean value is, what an undefined value is, what a null value is, and what a symbol is. Even though symbol is an advanced concept, it's a new concept in JavaScript, so we may also have to treat that later. But at this stage, just know that we have symbol as a data type as well. So we'll be covering these 5 numbers: string, boolean, undefined, and null. So first, what is a number? Okay, so back to our VS Code. We were able to set up our VS Code and we created a start file here, JavaScript file. I will go ahead to delete this because we don't need it. All right, so we are going to create a file called data types, and that is what we are going to deal with. Data types. Now, when you are naming your files, there are different ways people name files. In programming, it's not good to have a space like this. You can't do this. Data types.js. You don't get an error, but this is a bad practice. So don't name your file like this. So there are different ways you can go about naming a file that is, let's say, that has, with a file name that has a space in between. So you can do this. You can put a hyphen in between like this. So you can say data types. This is okay. You can put an underscore in between the two words, the data and the type. This is acceptable, and I prefer this to the previous one. I prefer using an underscore to I have a hyphen. The next is what I personally do more is to use camel case. So this is, so we have data in lowercase, then the next word type starts with an uppercase, the first letter starts with uppercase. If we have another word, I will also start the first letter with an uppercase. So I use this more in my codes. I prefer this approach to the others. So aside this, you can use the underscore or the hyphen, but never use a space to separate words in your file. It's a bad practice. All right, so so we have data types like this. So we mentioned that we have 6 and we are going to look at 5. So let's start with number. What is a number? So a number is a numeric value, a numeric value of data. So it can be an integer or a floating point number. So we can have a number to be 8. 8 is a number. So numbers from 0 to 10 and so on are numbers. And we can have floating point numbers. Floating point numbers are basically numbers with decimal points. So if I have something like 3.5, this is a floating point number. So the two categories are grouped under numbers. So if you have something like this, 3.5 is a number. If you have 3, is a number. So this is an integer and this is a floating point number. Okay, so that is numbers. So we can have something like this, num is equals to 3, or let's say 8. Now we're going to treat this, what we mean by let, in the coming video, but for now let's just focus on the data type we're dealing with, which is number in this case. The next thing is the string. So string is it's representation of data characters in your program. So I like to say that any character you can type on your keyboard is a string. So the syntax is you put all your strings in a double quote. It can be a single quote as well, so you can either use a double quote. So this is a convention. So if you want to create a string, you don't just, let's say you have something like this is a string, but you can't just type it like this. This is seen as something else. So this is not a syntax. So the convention is you put this in a quote. It can be a single quote or a double quote. So this becomes a string, right? So a string can be one letter like this, or combination of different letters. It can also involve numbers. So I like to say that anything you can type on your screen, on your keyboard, is a string. So all the symbols you have, they are also strings as well. So but remember that when you are dealing with strings, you must put them in a quote. So it can be a double quote or a single quote. So remember that. So if you have something like this, let's say we have a number and this. So we can say that we have this number. This number is not enclosed within a quote, and this is enclosed, is surrounded by a quote. So it's enclosed in a double quote. So looking at this is a number, and this is a number, and this is a string. So this is a string because it's enclosed within a quote, a double quote. So anything you put in a double quote or a single quote is a string. So it can be a number, it can be anything at all you can type on the keyboard. Once it's put in a quote, either a double quote or a single quote, it's a string. Even space is a string. Operators like this, they are all strings. So once you put something in a quote, whether single quote or a double quote, it's recognized as a string in JavaScript. And this is a number, so when you are typing numbers, you shouldn't put them in a quote. Remember that anything you put in a quote becomes a string. So if you are dealing with numbers, you don't put them in a quote. And if you type anything aside numbers without the quote, something like a U, you have an error because the system will interpret this to be something else. So if you meant to have a string U, then you have to put it in a quote, either a double quote or a single quote. So that's it for strings. The next we have a boolean. Now boolean values are either true or false. So when you talk of boolean, it's either you have a true or false. Okay, so that's what boolean values are. It's either you have a true or false, basically. So you can't have anything outside true or false. Then we have undefined and we have null. Now these two are similar because they both represent empty values. Now an undefined value is an unassigned value. An undefined value in JavaScript represents an unassigned value. So when we get into variables, that's the next thing we are going to treat. When we get into variables, we'll get to understand more. But for now, note that undefined values are unassigned values in JavaScript. So if I define a variable like this and I don't assign a value, now what we did here before, let's say 8, this is assignment. We're assigning a value of what? 8 to this variable number num. Okay, so if I create a variable without assigning a value to it, then automatically the variable is assigned undefined. So that's a value by default when a value is not assigned to a variable. So an undefined value represents an unassigned value. So unassigned. Okay, then we have null. So I mentioned before that null and undefined are similar because they represent empty values. Of course, when something is not assigned, it's empty, right? So for null represents intentional empty values. So let's say a programmer has num is equal to 90. Now after doing the operation you want to do with the variable num, you want to empty the variable. You don't want it to have a value anymore. You can go ahead and do num is equal to null. So this is how you empty a variable. So that's why we say the null is an intentional empty state of a variable or intentional empty value. So this is intentional in the sense that you assign it. So this is assigned by default, while this is assigned by the programmer. So if you create a variable and you don't assign it a value, then automatically the variable is assigned a value of undefined, which signifies empty. It's an empty state. And in this case, you are the one that is assigning the empty state. So that's why we say this represents the undefined, represents undefined unassigned state or unassigned value, while the null is intentional empty state. So when the programmer intentionally assign or empties a variable or assign an empty state to a variable, he uses the null. So that's what we have for the data types. We are going to be looking at the others subsequently as we go on in this course. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe. I'm sure you are enjoying the course so far, and I trust to give you my best. So subscribe to my channel to get updates, and please like. Thank you.